We want to welcome you to our virtual research method workshop on participant observation. In this presentation, we will define participant observation. We'll explore its evolution from social anthropology to political ethnography. We'll look at the processes, methodology of participant observation, the role of the researcher, the observer, the strengths and weaknesses, the qualitative and or quantitative research approach, ethical considerations, and offer a number of case studies. The definition of participant observation. Participant observation, as the term implies, involves the researcher living and interacting and participating in the daily life of a community. The people, who are often referred to as informants, are those being studied. It involves the gathering of data while participating with the observed in a social situation that is maintained for the purpose of scientific investigation. This can be done by acting in a formal or informal, concealed or revealed role while interacting face-to-face with the observed. It is an approach in social science where a researcher takes part in the daily activities, rituals, interactions, and events of a group of people as a means of learning the explicit and tacit aspects of life routines and of their culture. Long periods of time are spent watching people, coupled with talking with them about what they are doing, what they are thinking and saying, to determine how they see and understand the world. It is a unique method of investigating human existence, whereby the researcher more or less actively participates with people in commonplace situations and everyday life settings, while observing and otherwise gathering information. Participant observation and political research. Participant observation is a fruitful approach to study in depth the decision-making process in political institutions, particularly in administrative agencies and legislatures. Political ethnographies can be used to shed light on how marginalized social groups interact with modernization, globalization, and democracy, and how governmental policies and development programs come to be reinterpreted and accepted or not on the ground in situ. Other topics which can be researched using participant observation include the activities of political parties and parliamentarians, the judiciary, international organizations, social movements and anti-government organizations, terrorist groups, drug cartels, and the mafia. The following are some examples. Gillespie, 2007, led a team of ethnographers studying how British citizens, and British Muslims in particular, experienced securities and insecurities during the War on Terror. Anderson, 2014, carried out research with migrants and actually followed the migration route with them, rather than being immersed in a single place. Adams, 2013, provides an ethnographic account of reconstruction and recovery in New Orleans, showing how private companies exploited the disaster for profit. In 2006, Alan Gerber and his colleagues convinced Rick Perry, then governor of the state of Texas, to cooperate on a series of field experiments during his re-election campaign. The scholars benefited from their link to a high-profile, real-world campaign, and the candidate was able to use the data to determine how best to spend campaign resources. Key features of participant observation. Based on the definition, some key features of this research approach are its use as the main instrument for data collection is the observer, the investigator, the researcher. The investigator shares in the life of the activities and sentiments of the informants. It requires both detachment and the personal involvement of the researcher. The investigator plays a social role determined by research design requirements and cultural framework. There is an interdependency involved in this approach. It is both humanistic and scientific. It can be used both inductively and deductively. Frequently can take well-developed ideas or theories about hierarchy, power, division, etc., and see whether these ideas or theories apply in different contexts. Above all, it can produce thick descriptions. From sociology to political ethnography. First developed by social anthropologists and sociologists by Bronislaw Malinowski, who studied Argonauts of the Western Pacific, an account of native enterprise and adventure in the archipelagos of the Melanesian New Guinea, was one of the first studies, as was Margaret Mead's The Coming of Age in Samoa, a psychological study of primitive youth for Western civilization. Participant observation has been widely used across social sciences, and attention to political ethnographies has grown in recent decades. Political ethnographies have been carried out in a wide variety of contexts, as previously noted. Social anthropology to political ethnography, which makes this approach of data collection most closely associated with the ethnographic approach, which are used interchangeably and means spending long periods of watching people, coupled with talking to them about what they are doing, thinking, and saying. It is designed to see how they understand their world. Ethnography and participant observation are well suited to the investigation of political phenomena that other more formal techniques are ill-equipped to examine, such as hard-to-define topics or hard-to-access groups like guerrilla movements, revolutions, riots, racism, and terrorism. Richard Fenno, whose work Homestyle, Members in Their Districts, published in 1978, is considered the gold standard of qualitative research in political studies. Fenno remained famously detached from his research subjects in order to maintain objectivity. Fenno spent intensive amounts of time traveling to various states and districts with one congressional incumbent and astute covering opponents. Processes, the methodology of participant observation. Participant observation, as a unique method for investigation, considers experience as the source of knowledge. The methodology. A researcher or investigator can be seen as a craft person whose gender, ethnicity, and age are very important. Also of importance is the personal characteristics, the friendliness, the approachability, the dedication, the tenacity, the perseverance of the observer. It could be asked whether they have the patience to go months on end without any new progress, any new data. This does require an approach given the principles for quality, reliability, and validity of the data. Of importance also are objectivity, subjectivity, and bias. There are three interrelated steps. First, case selection and gaining access to field site is of importance. The criteria and justification for the choice of case and types of cases that are selected is very important, since the type of cases the researcher chooses to analyze can influence the answers received to a particular question. There are issues related to carrying out research in the field and collecting data, the role, the context, the informants that are observed and spoken to. The ways in which all this is done impacts quality, reliability, and validity. Recording observation and how the data is collected, how it is written up, coded, and used for analysis is of great and vital importance. It is also important to remember that participant observation is serious, disciplined research. If one chooses to use participant observation methods, he or she must commit to the hard systematic work that ethnography requires. Spending a day or a week at the local campaign office or in Congress without systematic note-taking will simply not suffice. The role of the researcher for the observer. Gold in a 1958 study distinguishes between research roles: the complete observer, the observer as participant, the participant observer, and complete participant. Problems arise regarding overt or covert observation, given the prolonged close relationship between the observer and participants. Some flexibility must be built in, and researchers will often need to make tactical decisions about their role. Regardless of the strategy one chooses in approaching a project, the researcher must strive to minimize his or her impact on the research environment, while the more participatory observer may have an advantage in putting his or her subjects at ease. He or she should try to avoid offering services or advice that could have a direct and significant impact on the dependent variable being studied. Farhana will now give us an overview of the strengths and weaknesses of participant observation.
Thank you so much, Peter. Now let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of participant observation. The core strength of the method has to do with the act of observation itself. Participant observation allows the researcher to observe people's daily activities and how their behavior changes in response to different stimuli or different events. Data collection is carried out in real time. This means there is opportunity for direct first-hand observation of informant activities, their interactions with each other and with different institutions or political processes. Participant observation produces thick descriptions based on the longitudinal or case study as the researcher gets out of the armchair to live, interact, and participate in daily life for months, even for years in the field, embedding themselves in the community. Sensitive topics can be researched where people may not directly reveal their real thoughts or opinions to a stranger in the first place. For example, Adam Ashford's book on witchcraft, violence, and democracy in South Africa involved 3 years of fieldwork, for which he learned Zulu, Sotho, and Xhosa language, learned how to play guitar to build up a detailed description of life under the shadow of extreme violence. The method is well suited to unpicking difficult to define or multifaceted political phenomena, where other research instruments such as survey, interview, or focus group may provide too blunt instruments to fully capture the diversity and meaning of a concept. It is a useful tool for generating theory, yes, in areas of research for which little is known or where existing theories provide limited explanation. It is also appropriate for exploratory studies, descriptive studies, and studies aimed at generating theoretical interpretations. The fact that ethnographic research comprises a strong emphasis on exploring the nature of social phenomena rather than setting out to test hypotheses about them. This means there are limitations, which includes the core weakness, which is a trade-off on how far findings can be generalized to other contexts and explained more generally. That is why it is often regarded as an inappropriate method to test general hypotheses. In other words, there is a trade-off between thick description and generalization in carrying out comparative ethnography or replicating existing ethnographies in other contexts. Combining ethnography with other methods of data collection can be used to derive testable hypotheses from the ethnographic data, which can be examined more generally using, for example, for survey data. The field itself can create difficulties. One of the key problems that ethnographers face is that they sometimes find the field site they have selected initially is not as is not an appropriate area to investigate at all. The solution is to focus on the population than the site for research purposes. For example, if someone wants to study about Punjabi diaspora, they live largely at Brampton, so that should be a good site. Or if someone wants to study about Rohingyas, so Myanmar would not be a safe option, and they may rather choose the Bangladeshi uh, refugee camps at the presence of NGO to provide a safe site. One of the main problems with ethnographic research is that it is very difficult for the reader to know whether this has been already done, which makes it difficult to assess the reliability and validity of the research. More methodological appendices would help to establish the reliability and validity of the research and how far it could be generalized to other contexts. The method is not suited to collect small amount of information about a large number of variables, and not also useful enough for the examination of causal relationship, especially by the way of manipulation of environmental conditions. For example, DeWalt and DeWalt note that male and female researchers have access to different information as they have access to different people, setting, and bodies of knowledge. They encourage the new researchers to practice reflexivity at the beginning of their research to help themselves understand the biases they may interfere with correct interpretation of what is observed. Now let's talk about the implication of experimental and non-experimental research within the debate of qualitative or quantitative research and approaches appropriate for participant observation. It is related with the capacity of the researcher to alter and manipulate variables, and in participant observation, it is highly likely that the researcher is directly involved and produces a certain level of subjectivity and biases, and in quantitative research, which seeks external validity, in which subjectivity biases are lessened if not absent. Participant observation is qualitative in that sense that it aims for detailed description of the features, properties, and characteristics of human experience and circumstances as well as interpreting them. Further qualitative description can be used to construct interpretations of the human conditions specifically aimed at scholarly understanding. All of this allows for rich, thick qualitative descriptions of human existence. But does it restrict participant observations in the quantitative approach? We prefer to disagree and argue that participant observation can bridge and complement both qualitative and quantitative approaches. For example, Miner during 1960s, who served as a member of a suburban school board, used his familiarity with the school local politics to develop questionnaires and aggregate data collection techniques for a comparative study of several school districts in the Chicago area of the United States. Here, familiarity with school politics is the participant that the researcher observed and used that as the foundation of his comparative research through systematic measurements. About the ethical considerations, Moore and Savage outline the specific dilemmas raised by participant observation in practice and the difficulties experienced in complying with a predetermined process designed for gaining fully informed consent. However, Schwartz and Schwartz emphasize that ethical issues can raise in participant observation, and researchers need to be able to respond to the circumstances they find in the field. In doing so, researchers must establish a firm boundary around the research field and prevent inclusion of those who are marginal to the study and who have not given informed consent. Therefore, Gold talks about four elements, given that gaining informed consent is an ongoing process. First, all relevant aspects of what is to occur and what might occur should be explained in the potential research participant. The second, potential participant should be able to understand that information. Third, potential participant must be competent to make a mature judgment. Fourth, it should be voluntary and free. DeWalt, and Wayland also advises research to take some of the field notes publicly to reinforce that what the researcher is going to collect data for research purposes. Another ethical responsibility is to preserve the anonymity of the participants in the final write-up and in the field notes as well to prevent their identification. Should the field notes be more openly accessible for inspection at the same time also? DeWalt and Wayland also point out that there is an ethical concern regarding the relationship established by the researchers when conducting participant observation. The researchers need to develop close relationships, yet those relationships are difficult to maintain when the researcher returns to his home or her home at a distant location. So in case of political research, Glaser mentions 7 considerations. So they are scheduled strategically. Second, adjust the interview request to the situation. Third, get multiple perspective. Fourth, recognize that establishing trust and gaining access goals sometimes are at odds with each other. 5, reveal purpose, suppress opinions. 6, do not overlook details in the rush of activity. 7. Be a pack rat to take whatever is offered, as we can never know what can become useful in the long run, like buying a newspaper every day. Participant observation can therefore help scholars to examine the underlying assumptions, motivations, and processes of topics like social movements in relation to issues such as protest tactics, media strategies, articulation of visions, and collective identity formation. Which takes us to the final section of our presentation, which are the case study. The first one is based on the fact that social scientists cannot actually become a member of the group in government, in this case, bureaucracy. However, it is also true that participant observation in government has distinct benefit of offering operationalization of normative values about the politics administration dichotomy. Here, Mordecai Lee was a state senator for Wisconsin in the United States from 1976 to 1989, and he was also an academic who looked at the politics administration dichotomy. He looked at the authority and relationship between the elected representative and the bureaucrats, and as a participant observer, and also as a state senator, as already embedded in the legislature, he was able to bring out the thick descriptions. The second case is about participant observation and human mobility. It is the research called The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail by DeLeon. Here, Jason DeLeon depicts the implication of prevention through deterrence (PTD) policy by the United States Border Patrol over migrants who aspire to reach the United States from Central American countries. Such migrants' violent trajectory is labeled as open grave, referring to the desert which exists at the US-Mexico border in the Arizona state. DeLeon critically deliberates both cause and the effect of PTD within the analytical framework of ethnography with a particular focus on migration, where he observed undocumented migration trails in both sides of the US-Mexico border for more than 5 years and found that the act of necroviolence is at the core of PTD policy. That's it for our presentation. Thank you so much for your patience. You're awesome. Thank you.